Alrighty then. Good afternoon to everyone. Looks like a full group today. That's awesome. Ready for our fun exercise today? This group quiz, but that's later. What I want to do is wrap up our discussion of Wittgenstein, his discussion on language, in particular private language, and in particular language referencing internal mental states or internal sensations. That'll tie into and will be a kind of transition into the philosophy of mind, into contemporary issues in the philosophy of mind in particular. And I did talk about this briefly, at least I probably only mentioned it last time, so I'm going to just review the role that he sees of language in the world. I'm not going to do the role today. I'm going to use the group work for that. So just remind you to make sure your names are on the pages that I'll be passing out to you. Break them into groups of 3. I'll describe that in a moment. So Wittgenstein is talking about the importance of language and how language achieves meaning, of how words achieve meaning. They do not have meaning in any absolute sense. We don't get meaning of words by going out into the world, finding objects, and then attaching names to them, as if we can just do that internally. He says there's a similar problem in trying to establish a connection between things in the world and the words we use, but also the mental states, the physical states that we may be in, the sensations that we have, we then apply terms to it. It isn't the case that we do this. In fact, language, the fact that we're able to use it, for Wittgenstein, implies an already embeddedness. We're ensconced within what? What does he call it? What are we already a part of once we are able to point at things and then name them and understand them? We're part of a language game, and to be part of a language game, a language user, is to be part of what he'll call a form of life. I'll reference that again. I must not have spent much time on that term before. We're already able to understand others through the use of language, not because we apply some kind of singular logical structure underneath language, but there's a multitude of language games. And in order to be a language user, you have to understand and be proficient with the tools of the language. Following certain kinds of rules is something that gets embedded within you by being part of a culture, being part, he'll call it again, a form of life. We'll see how accessible this is. And then this discussion of language then gets corralled into a discussion of mental states, in particular of pain. And I think pain is one of the most interesting of all the mental states. It's one of those things that crosses over multiple disciplines. Psychology is interested in pain. Pain states. Dentistry is interested in pain states. Philosophers of mind are interested in pain. And what exactly pain is. Is it something that you can't be mistaken about, for instance? Do you understand the question? Have you ever been in pain and somebody tells you, no, you're not? Has that ever happened to you? And did you say, you know what, you're right. Thank you for correcting me about my pain state. I think that's the appropriate response. Well, depends on the context.
That really happened on my birthday.
Recently?
Yeah, on Friday.
Oh, wow, that is recent. Well, happy birthday. Somebody told you weren't in pain? And
Okay, so...
Well, go ahead, yes.
So we have this dog, Haley threw her toy on me, and of course the dog runs up and scrambles on me, scratches me. And I said, ow, why did you do that?
To the dog?
To Haley.
Okay, yeah.
Well, to both.
Okay.
Daisy's like, I think it hurt. But I was like, why'd you do that? And Haley was like, what do you mean? And I was like, that really hurt. The dog scratched me. I showed her the scratches, and she was like, that's not even, it doesn't even hurt. And I was like, what do you mean? Fuck you. And I left and took a nap.
Oh, wow. So, from that view, you cannot be mistaken about your internal mental state, your internal pain state. And that seems right, because who are you to correct me? You can't have, we ended up with that image of, what's his name, the actor hitting himself in the chest. what is his name? Oh, there it is, Marky Mark. I thought it was a GIF or GIF or whatever the hell it is. I couldn't, it's not. I thought it was. He's beating himself because it related to Wittgenstein's quote here. This is my pain, as if I own it, I possess it, and it's meaningful to me. I can reference it, I can talk about it, I can use language about it in a way that perhaps only I can understand. And in a way, we kind of feel that when somebody tells us we're not in pain. But then you look at, I'm not going to go into his beetle in the box example. This was a joke based on a beetle in the box. The example he gives is an actual beetle in a matchbox. An actual beetle, not like the car. So anyway, I ruined the joke here by trying to explain it. And he's trying to compare the mental states that we have, the internal mental states, and the language we use to describe it with this thought experiment of imagining a group of people who all have what they call a beetle in a box, in a matchbox, but they are the only ones able to access that, to have access to that particular box. And before he gets to that, I'll give you the section that you did have to read. Section 257. Let me just wrap up this discussion and then we'll get into the new one with Churchland. But if you have your reading from Wittgenstein with you, if not, that's all right. Hopefully you didn't print it. Hopefully you didn't just go to the Wittgenstein work on philosophical investigations and just push print, because I didn't take out the sections. I just kept the whole text, so you'd be printing. Nobody did that, right? Hundreds of pages. Nobody, just so you know, it's the whole thing. I probably shouldn't have done that. On section 257, he says, and he starts with, this is a question, quote, "What would it be like if human beings showed no outward signs of pain, did not groan or grimace, etc.? Then it would be impossible," this person, he's setting up this person's viewpoint, "it would be impossible to teach a child the use of the word toothache." Wittgenstein's response, "Well, let's assume that the child is a genius and invents himself a name for the sensation. But then, of course, he couldn't make himself understood when he used that word." Think of whatever word you want to come up with a particular sensation. "So does he understand the name without being able to explain its meaning to anyone? Can I have an understanding of something that I cannot descriptively, linguistically represent?" But what does it mean to say that he has named his pain? How has he done this naming of pain? And whatever he did, what was its purpose? When one says he gave a name to a sensation, one forgets that a great deal of stage setting in the language is presupposed if the mere act of naming is to make sense. And when we speak of someone's having given a name to pain, what is presupposed is the existence of the grammar of the word pain. It shows the posts where the new word is stationed, which is an odd way of putting it. You've already presumed some kind of embeddedness within a language game once we start talking about our own sensations. To assume that we can step outside of any kind of linguistic using community and have our own meaningful language, our own meaningful private language, is as absurd as the Cartesian view, René Descartes, that our minds are wholly private and separable from our bodies. Wittgenstein is not a fan of Cartesian substance dualism, which was a common view at that time, up until, we'll see later, with Gilbert Ryle in the 1950s, 1949. But the Cartesian view is quite straightforward. Who's taking contemporary right now? And not contemporary, that's all of you. Who's taking modern? So have you gotten to Descartes? So what's substance? Cartesian dualism. Give us the nutshell. Yeah?
He believes that mind and body are two separate things, and in order to be you, specifically you need your mind, and not as much the body kind of. So that's a substance dualism, that body is a substance, and the mind is a substance, and they're separate things.
And if that's the case, what do we have access to visually, perceptually, sensibly? Nothing but our bodies. We cannot step into another person's mind. We're wholly relying upon a kind of argument by analogy. I know in my own case that I've got certain kinds of mental states, let's say, that I have a mind. And I then say, well, this is going to be true of everyone else because what? What am I relying upon? I can't get at your mind. I can't get past your physicality. I can't get past the mere meat machine or meat puppet, if you prefer that phrase. No, that's not actually right. That doesn't. We're meat puppets. What kind of, I guess? The connection of language and with language is there's no possibility of having this private language. The assumption is that if I'm a Cartesian substance dualist, then of course this is possible. Of course I have a private language that only I can access with respect to the concepts within me. But the absurdity of this, it's not obvious how to see this, is when we think of Robinson Crusoe, we think about him talking to himself. But what is he saying? He may be speaking in English. He's the only one there, but he's brought with him. Same thing with the guy from Castaway. He's brought with him all of his conventions. Do you remember the movie Castaway? In fact, he brings his ethics with him too, which is ridiculous. He's cast away for months and months, maybe years, I don't know. How long was it? Years. And he's got all these FedEx, he worked for FedEx. This whole big commercial for FedEx, basically. He's got all these boxes, and he opens them up to see if there's anything useful to keep him alive, but there's one box he doesn't open, because I guess that gave him hope that he would make it. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, he takes that box and hand delivers it. And who knows what was in it? Could have been a flashlight, could have been a cell phone, could have been whatever that had saved it. It's ridiculous that he wouldn't have opened it. Obviously, you're going to open every box. But he's carried with him. He's the only human being alive on that island, but that doesn't mean he's not still utilizing all the conventions, all of the rule following that he engaged in while he was in society. Wittgenstein goes on, section 258. Let us imagine the following case. I want to keep a diary about the recurrence of a certain sensation. To this end, I associate it with the sign S, and write this sign in a calendar for every day on which I have the sensation. I first want to remark that a definition of the sign cannot be formulated. He can't even get started. There can't be a Robinson Crusoe that starts without community. It starts without a linguistic community. There's no language that would get started. It's meaningless to speak of one individual having a language only for that individual. We'll see how this connects again to mind. But still, I can give myself a kind of ostensive definition. What's ostension? Do you remember? Huh?
Because of this, like it is, like you can determine that it's that, like kind of obvious.
Ostensive. No, it's a kind of the way that we define things. It's an ostensive technique. It just means pointing to something. So I want to define table, so I point to it. They call that ostensive definitions. It's an odd term. It literally means to point to. And the question is, well, what am I doing if that's how language starts, by simply having objects that we then have symbols that point to? That's not what Wittgenstein thinks is the case. How do we point to it? What kind of inner ostension, inner pointing to, do we utilize when we ask whether or not we're in pain? He asks, how? Can I point to the sensation? Not in the ordinary sense. But I speak or write the sign down, and at the same time I concentrate my attention on the sensation. And so, as it were, I point to it inwardly. But what is this ceremony for? For that is all it seems to be, just a ceremony, a meaningless ceremony. A definition surely serves to establish the meaning of a sign. Well, that is done precisely by the concentrating of my attention, for in this way I impress upon myself the connection between the sign and the sensation. But, quote, I impress it on myself can only mean this process brings it about that I remember the connection right in the future. But in the present case, I have no criterion of correctness, which is his key point. One would like to say, whatever is going to seem right to me is right. And that only means that here we can't talk about right. It's narrowing it down to what might be called subjectivism, where the subjectivist is somebody who says, this is correct, this is true, because I say it is. I'm the arbiter of what is right or wrong. Now, I might be the arbiter of what is right or wrong with respect to taste. I think hard-boiled eggs are absolutely disgusting, vile, horrible. You can't correct me about that. Can I be corrected about having a fever? Can I be corrected about being in pain? I've corrected my children. I've told them, you're not sick. You don't have a fever. In fact, can't we tell sometimes better than the individual? Can't we tell their mental states sometimes better than the individual themselves? Why are you angry, Milo? I'm not angry. Actually, it works better with Lola. She's younger. She doesn't have a sense of her own mental states. Have you not been told by somebody outside of you that you might be somebody outside of you? Have you been told by another person? Gosh, I don't know why I brought attention to that weird way of saying it. That you are expressing some kind of emotion that you might disagree with? And have you not actually been mistaken? Is it not that? Yes, go ahead.
Doesn't that happen with like food too, though? Like you said, like the hard-boiled egg thing. But like with kids all the time, they're like, "Oh, I don't like that. I don't want that," because it's like.
Yeah, that's a little bit different. And I still get. I'm 45 years old. My wife says, "How do you know you don't like that? Why don't you try mayonnaise?" Because it's freaking disgusting. I'm 45. I don't need to change my diet now. I'm old enough to know what I want, what I don't want. But if my child who's 6 doesn't eat anything, and I tell them, you need to eat this or you'll die, and you like macaroni and cheese when it's this shape, why does the shape matter? You see where I'm getting into a logical argument with a 6-year-old, that the shape of the pasta is irrelevant to the taste of it. You like the taste here, you will like the taste here.
I don't know, you're advocating the wrong audience on that one.
What?
The shape definitely, most certainly does matter. If you're talking about mac and cheese specifically,
Okay.
Sorry, easy neck shapes matter.
Each shape is.
All right, okay.
Just letting you know. No, you're
Let me see.
correct.
Let me think. Okay, better. Okay. How about chicken nuggets?
Dino nuggets are way better than that.
What? Diamond?
the heads up.
Dino nuggets are
Dino
so much better.
It's irrelevant to the taste.
No, it's not.
All right. All right. Okay, well, you saw what point I was trying to make. Now I think you're just playing with me. So, it seems that I can't be mistaken about a taste for me, but it might be mistaken about certain kinds of pain states. And to say that I have some inner access that nobody else does is a kind of remnant of Cartesian substance dualism. It's meaningless for me to be able to talk as if only I could understand the meanings of these terms. A private language in that sense is inconceivable. Can't even get started. There is, as he puts it, no criterion of correctness. Well, yeah, there is. It's me. But that's extreme subjectivism. That only I can be correct. And that means whatever belief I have, it's going to be correct because who's the arbiter of that? The person who has the beliefs. And I wouldn't have the belief if I didn't think it was correct. Therefore, it's correct because I have it. That circular reasoning is flawed. Wittgenstein doesn't put it that way, but that's what he said. Yeah.
Is like the same person over time be considered like the speaker and audience? Like if you make up a private language and write it down and then read it again like several years later, then you
Come back to it. So you're a different person. You're a different person technically, and it's just a long. I've tried that years ago when I was apparently lonely to play chess with myself. So I'd make a move, and then I'd wait until I'd forgotten the intention and the. No, it wasn't. This is not awesome. And I would wait like a number of days. What were my intentions? What were my earlier selves' intentions? And I don't remember them, so I can't really think ahead and defeat them. And then I make the next move. It's a horrible. I don't think I ever got more than 5 moves in because months had gone by. And I guess technically, yeah, that's a different person. Right? And so that different person could then come and check. But then what are you appealing to? That gets into very interesting questions of personal identity and, of course, questions of memory. It's still your memory. And his point would be, no, you're relying only on your memory. And how are you going to confirm whether your memory is correct in the future? You can't appeal to anyone else. You're no longer part of a language group. You're no longer part of a community. And he talks about communities, forms of life in different senses. One of the questions I want us to think about, we're not going to get into details here, but if the rules for a language are the product of agreement among members of the linguistic community without external objective restraints on that usage in the shape of the facts of the world, does it follow that truth is the product of our agreements also? I don't like the way I asked that question now. I'm asking, not does Wittgenstein's conception of how we come to get meaning by being part of linguistic users of language, following certain kinds of rules that are set that we get enculturated into. But if that's the case, does meaning and truth also become dependent upon rule using particular communities. In other words, he doesn't like the idea of subjectivism that tells us there's no criterion of correctness because I am the sole arbiter. But what's the difference, logically, by saying I'm the sole arbiter versus my community is the sole arbiter? What's that called in epistemology, where we say something is true depending upon the group? Relativism, or cultural relativism, to be more specific. And the answer is that that's kind of accurate. The form of life, the habituated and enculturated rules of a language community. That's what he means by a form of life. That's what connects us. That's what enables us to have meaning and understanding of our language. At one point he says the reason we couldn't understand a lion if it could talk is that we don't share its form of life. And I don't know that I agree with that. Because aren't there people who study lions? Aren't there people who study... I'm not going to watch that one. Aren't there people who study bees? In fact, let's see.
Honeybees have some fascinating abilities, among them being able to communicate by performing a unique dance. It informs hive mates where a newly discovered food source is located. Every cycle of this waggle dance roughly describes the shape of the figure 8. Let's rewind and look in more detail. The bee only waggles on a part of its route, the straight run, indicated here by the waved line. The secret lies in the direction of the straight run, or to be more precise, in the angle between the straight run and the perpendicular, which in this case is 90 degrees to the left. This tells the other bees that food is available 90 degrees to the left of the sun. If the angle is 60 degrees to the right, they'll be flying 60 degrees to the right of the sun.
Okay. What? Oh, it's in German. Why do I show that? What's the relevance, yeah?
Because if bees could talk and do that, maybe we could figure out what the heck they were talking about.
No, we can. We just did figure out what they're talking about. That's a language. It's a dance. Somebody watched that and stared. You know, the first person that came up with this, you know what? I think those bees are dancing. And also, that dance is communicating to others. What would have been the response to that? Clearly you're on drugs, yes. And maybe the first person was just staring at the bees, and then somehow, a pattern has emerged. Oh, by the way, such a person who studies these creatures is called a behaviorist. Yeah. He clapped, and he's got a hurt arm, and he clapped. Nobody else did. Yeah, thank you. Anyway, we don't share a form of life with the bees, and yet somehow, and they've tested this, you've heard about the bee waggle dance, right? Oh, really? Well, there it is. And they figured it out. That's a kind of communication. It's not a private language. We're not bees, but we kind of share a form of life, as he puts it. And if you think about it, if we took, in the U.S., that's a form of life, I suppose. Speaking English, what am I doing? Form of life. What? Why do I even write on the board? Form of life. And so we speak English. That's one system of rules. But then you can expand on this. For those who speak English, there's England as well. There's another. A form of life might be that includes bees and their behavior. You can include all sorts of other things. I think I have more. Where is it? With Arrival, aliens are also a form of life. Have anyone seen the movie Arrival? Yeah. What's going on with that? What is she doing? She's communicating. And this alien form eerily squirts out these ink patterns, and it's a pattern. You can tell it's a pattern. You don't know what it means initially, but she comes to understand it, and they learn quite interesting things. The language actually, once you understand it, it affects your conception of reality, conception of time. It's fascinating. So it's a really interesting idea. I don't know how great the movie was, but the point being, even with these alien forms, we might share an underlying form of life such that we can translate it. It's not a private language, even among bees, even among aliens, and so on. And so we might be able to salvage a Wittgensteinian view of sharing a form of life if we think of it as in extremely broad terms. One other question, and then, yeah.
Yeah, so like with animals like with dogs and even cats and other
Seven
domesticated
members.
animals, like what would Wittgenstein say about like our communication with them? Because I feel like my friend recently adopted a dog, and I've noticed that she has like different frequencies of barks and yelps,
Really?
and groans and growls for different things. And
You'd have to take time, make note of it, see what other dogs do. So this is how that's how they determine that monkeys have a language. Certain monkeys that survive, when they have a particular call, a warning, there's a specific warning for when there's a danger on the ground, and you can see them all jumping to the trees. They have another warning, which sounds different. They recognize it. We wouldn't recognize it upon hearing it just once. That tells them there's a threat from above, so they scurry somewhere else on the ground. It's not inconceivable that dogs also have some kind of different... When they're play fighting, I can't tell when a dog is play fighting. It looks real to me, but from their perspective, the way that they're carrying themselves, that's a kind of communication. It's a body language. I think Wittgenstein would be fine with that, expanding this form of life to include body language as well. And we can, to an extent, communicate with dogs, maybe not cats because they're liars. Actually, doesn't that come up in Wittgenstein? Doesn't he mention dogs can't lie? Do you remember that? There's some funny bits in here. You can't give yourself a gift, right? That makes sense. But dogs, why can't dogs lie? And by lie, I mean fib.
They're too humble.
They're too humble. What does it mean to lie? There's a great movie about this, The Invention of Lying, where the whole population was incapable, didn't have a conception of lying, except one person did. And what happened to that person? What do you think? What is it?
Pretend to be kind of like a dog figure.
I don't actually remember. I was hoping somebody would remember. It's Ricky Gervais, right?
Yeah.
It's he ended up being able to take advantage of a lot of people. Anyway, I don't want to get into that too much now. It is interesting why dogs can't lie. What does that even mean? Can they pretend? They can play fight, but that's not lying. That's in fact putting forth on purpose a pretense. All right. So where does this leave us? Wittgenstein is not a straightforward dualist with respect to mind and body, with respect to issues of consciousness. But he's also not a straightforward empiricist. The reductionist philosophy that he and Bertrand Russell and Gottlob Frege advanced influences so many philosophers in the 20th century, in particular the philosopher that you had a reading for today, among others who are known as eliminative materialists, arguing that we can explain all sorts of things, even very, very, very complex things, like human consciousness, with a reductivist analysis on par with what we saw with the logical atomists, with the attempt at logically reducing down to its constituents the parts with respect to sentences, with respect to language. You saw it also in mathematics, and now we're going to see it applying this kind of reductivist model into the science of consciousness. And I want to start with some group work that has to do with the reading. In fact, what I'm going to do, this is the benefit of you being here today. You did have a reflection today. You're going to do that and the quiz at the same time. Huh? Yeah. That's good. You can clap for that too. That's a weird thing to clap for. Here's the quiz. I'm going to give you, I'm going to break into groups of 3. Wait, what am I doing? 3 people. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 29. I counted 29. Is there 29? 30. So 10 groups? Yeah. It's weird. I'm going to do that. I've got them all almost here. Instead of just getting right into a discussion of it, I'm going to just try to go through a bunch of some of this material here in an effort to answer the general question that was raised on your quiz. First of all, there's Patricia Churchland, Pat Churchland as she's called. She's married to Paul Churchland, who also is an eliminative materialist, which is, I guess, as you would expect. It would be awkward if one was not and the other was. Strange relationship, I think. They're both down at UCSD. At least they were. I'm not sure if they're still there. Very good. And I need the last one. You don't need to have spelling. I don't care about spelling or penmanship. What do you? This is just the one last, right?
It's just the last sentence.
Okay. You can click on that and find a number of her publications. This was written in 1993. This was a presentation she was giving to the APA, the American Philosophical Association, which was in San Francisco, which is where it's going to be next semester, by the way, in San Francisco again, the APA. That's the biggest conference that philosophy puts on, the American Philosophical Association. She was giving the presidential address, and this was when studies of consciousness started to become relevant again, with about an 80-year hiatus. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion of consciousness because there was a movement within science generally, but also in philosophy, and in fact, largely a result of philosophy and logical positivism. You start to then influence science, which gives us logical empiricism, which is to say, we're going to study that which is empirically verifiable. Consciousness, a scientist studying consciousness, is like a physicist studying ghosts. I need the quiz. Let's have that turned in, please. A physicist studying ghosts is ridiculous. Imagine that's what your job is. I'm a physicist, and what is it that you're studying? And then you get on that show To Catch a Ghost. I'm combining shows. Ghost hunters, To Catch a Ghost. To Catch a Predator, that's a ghost. Okay, you know what I'm saying. That would be ridiculous. It's unqualified authority. Your job is physics, dealing with the physical world. What is this concept of consciousness going all the way back to Descartes? Some ethereal, non-physical, spiritual substance? No, that's not for us. That's not for science. And philosophy, at least Anglo-American philosophy, analytic philosophy, didn't focus much. You see, where Wittgenstein is interested in that, although the way he gets at it is kind of elusive. He's clearly in the analytic tradition. And then he writes the Philosophical Investigations, and you see his different approach. He's not following the standard line of analytic philosophy that seeks only that which is empirically verifiable. The concept of consciousness and consciousness studies is a fascinating one that Churchland, who is, and I'll define what eliminative, or I'll ask you what eliminative materialism is in a moment, who's responding to a long history of analytic philosophy, in particular, here's the negative she sees, of linguistic philosophy, ordinary language philosophers trying to get at the world through analysis of language. She finds that to be limiting, to say the least, and some of her comments about it are a bit aggressive. In the opening of this text, the preface, she says, in the mid-70s, I discovered that my patience with most mainstream philosophy had run out. What had instead begun to seem promising was the new wave in philosophical method, which ceased to pander to ordinary language and which began in earnest to reverse the anti-scientific bias typical of linguistic analysis. There's debates about what she means by that or who she's attacking there. I'm just going to give you a sense of what we've been discussing so far as an attempt to get at the world through evaluating language she finds to be insufficient. Even here I had a major misgiving, however, because the sciences embraced by the new wave as relevant to understanding the nature of the mind did not include neuroscience. Indeed, the best of what there was had espoused a novel and sophisticated form of dualism, theory dualism, that dismissed neuroscience as largely irrelevant to the theories in psychology and philosophy. Since I was a materialist and hence believed that the mind is the brain, it seemed obvious that a wider understanding of neuroscience could not fail to be useful if I wanted to know how we see, how we think, how we reason, and how we decide. All of which, by the way, those last ones I just gave you, are somewhat easy problems in the philosophy of mind. This question of materialism, this question of what grounds our consciousness, this is not a new one. We see Hippocrates telling us one ought to know that on the one hand, pleasure, joy, laughter, and games, and on the other, grief, sorrow, discontent, and dissatisfaction arise only from the brain. It is especially by it that we think, comprehend, see, and hear, that we distinguish the ugly, ugly from the beautiful, the bad from the good, the agreeable from the disagreeable. It is from the brain. That's a different claim than what we're going to see with Churchland, who's going to tell us these things just are neuronal firings. We can reduce them to an identity relation. And we can understand ourselves and our place in the world in a way that we never had a capacity to do prior to the development of technology and science of the 20th and 21st centuries. Human nervous system, she says, display, this is from the reading you had today, an impressive roster of complex capacities. In fact, this is the very beginning of the paper. Perceiving, learning, and remembering, planning, deciding, performing actions, as well as the capacities to be awake, fall asleep, dream, pay attention, and be aware. Although neuroscience has advanced spectacularly in this century, we still do not understand in satisfying detail how any capacity in the list emerges from networks of neurons. We don't completely understand how humans can be conscious, but neither do we understand how they walk, run, climb trees, or pole vault. I don't understand pole vaulting at all, by the way. I used to, in high school, people would be practicing pole vaulting. How do you start training for pole vaulting? You know what I mean? How do you go from, no, that's not quite it, because won't you get hurt really bad? You know what I'm talking about, pole vaulting? I guess. But I've never seen anyone practicing with a short pole. It's always this huge pole that flings them. It's incredibly dangerous. How do you just start doing that?
Maybe you get attached to like a thing.
No.
No? That would make sense. I don't have time for this. I don't know why I'm bringing it up, but
Courage, I guess.
courage. Yeah. So, let's forget it. Nor when one stands back from it all is awareness intrinsically more mysterious than motor control. And he goes on. She goes on. These are all, as we're going to see next time, easy problems. In contrast to what a philosopher that you'll have read for next time, David Chalmers, will call the hard problem. And the hard problem just is consciousness. And she doesn't see it as a hard problem at all. Or rather, she sees them all equally difficult. So what does she mean? Nor when one stands back from it all is awareness. There's difference. A lot of philosophers will talk about awareness and distinguish it from consciousness. Perhaps after her paper. Oh, no, there's situations in which she's aware of. She mentions split brain cases. She mentions blind sight. Has anyone heard of blind sight? How could there be such a thing as that's a contradiction to have blind sight? Anyone heard of that? What's
Not like that Daredevil. It's where like you can't see, but you use your sense of hearing to know where everything is.
That's a little different. That's a little different. We'll talk about that and I'll mention Thomas Nagel's "What Is It Like to Be a Bat" paper, which will be relevant next time. Somebody wrote a paper on that. Somebody wrote a whole paper, and it was really influential, believe it or not. Yeah.
Is blind sight sort of like, I'm not sure, is it when someone is blind from birth and yet they can see within their own head? Or?
No, it's not quite that yet.
It's kind of where one part of the brain can kind of see it and the other part can't. So something can be in front of you and one side of the body will be doing it and the other side.
It's sort of like that. So a patient, and we discovered this with patients who have damaged a certain part of their occipital cortex, and certain images come into their brain, but they don't go through the areas that emerge to the level of consciousness. However, they do get into the brain sufficiently to enable the person to properly navigate their surroundings. And so if you ask that person, what am I doing right now? You're moving your hand up and down, all right? So you can see it. No, I can't see it. I can't see what you're doing. But it's a guess because there's enough information getting into your head. It's like when you're driving long distance. You're able to maneuver around cars, not smash into them, but you're not conscious of everything that's going on. Somebody asked you, do you remember everything you just drove past? You know that you can't always do that. Oftentimes you're not fully aware. It's a kind of blind sight. It's a kind of awareness without consciousness that enables you to navigate your surroundings. Like the argument is similar to lizards. Their brain structure is such that they're able to grab things, but probably not in a way that's conscious. You're able to do all sorts of things. You're able to walk through that door without needing to be consciously aware of everything that you're doing.
While you're asleep.
Or what?
Reading while you're asleep.
That's a little different, I think. That's a little different. That deals with the autonomic nervous system that doesn't require as much input. With non-conscious awareness, you're still taking in inputs, and that's affecting your reactions.
Like you're not like, doing it, but then you just forget it.
What, breathing?
No, like if
Oh.
okay, so like you know when you go home and you're not paying attention, you just do
Yeah.
it like kind of like reflexively, and then like
You were conscious in the moment, you just immediately forgot it.
yeah.
That's a possibility. Daniel Dennett, who we'll talk about next time, refers to that as the difference between Orwellian and Stalin-esque confusions of memory. Is it the case that you have erased those memories in Stalin-esque fashion? This is really weird that he does that. Or is it Orwellian in the sense that prior to even getting to the situation, the idea of it has been confused or erased or something like that? That doesn't help explain things. That confuses things. So forget I said all that. But probably what's happening, it's like you're driving, you don't have to be fully conscious of the cars around you. And it's only when one juts in front of you that conscious interaction comes in. You're on your phone, you're talking to people next to you, you're not thinking of your driving, but you have enough information coming in to operate the vehicle without crashing. And what's going on there is interesting. Is it non-conscious perception? It's unclear. How do we explain this? How do we explain these difficult problems of how, for instance, the example we were just looking at, how do we explain cases of just what it is like to be you right now experiencing this lecture, sitting in these amazingly comfortable chairs in a room that's probably too cold, but it's really quite nice. Did the air just shut off, by the way?
It's been shut
It's
off
fine.
for a while.
Okay, it's fine. Is everyone all right? Temperature-wise, we only got 5 minutes. How do you explain this? And people will say, I can't imagine explaining conscious experience, for instance, of color perception, by reducing it all merely to neuronal firings. To which Churchland would say, well, it being unimaginable to you doesn't mean it's impossible. And by the way, that's a pretty, unimaginative person who can't imagine being able to explain it. Of course, what is meant by that is, surely something's left out by a pure reductionist model, right? Her argument's going to be that, well, the reason this is counterintuitive, as many, many, many scientific theories, hypotheses are counterintuitive, is that our brains did not evolve to understand these things. The brain didn't evolve or get designed, to not beg the question, to understand itself. It didn't evolve to understand philosophy. That doesn't make sense. So, for instance, here's me thinking all interesting philosophical thoughts thousands of years ago. Let's imagine, and there is a saber-toothed tiger. Do you see? Our brain probably evolved for protection, to survive. It didn't evolve to learn how to reason deductively. That's why deduction is so difficult sometimes. It didn't evolve to learn how to understand the underpinnings of the universe and meaning and purpose and function. Those things, why? Why would I sit there and think about those things? Those things aren't relevant until we can, as Aristotle puts it, have some space, have some luxury. Philosophy is, in a way, in this sense, a luxury. I don't go that far. I think it's important. It's not just a luxury. It ought to be something that everyone has access to because it matters. More on that some other time. But it seems that this is not enough. What did our brains evolve in order to succeed in? As she puts it, the 4 F's. Our brains evolved to help us succeed in feeding, in fleeing, in fighting. She's clever. And in reproducing. I thought that was great. Because fornication, damn it. No, reproduction works for this joke, but that would have worked as well. So, given that understanding, it's not surprising that it's hard for us to imagine how neurons firing or dendritic connections or whatever it might be could give rise to the experience of color perception, or of coldness, or of warmth, or of however you experience anything that's interesting, beautiful, and so forth. She wants to tell us that she is a reductionist. She's an eliminative materialist. Very briefly, what does that mean? What is she eliminating? She's a materialist, which means matter. Physical stuff is all there is. So what would she eliminate?
Eliminating like the
more like mystical aspects of philosophy, like the idea, like especially like taking it back to dualism, like the idea of this immaterial mind being able to interact with the material body, like excluding those kind of things and just focusing on what we can actually reduce down to the simpler components, like not posing more questions to answer a question, like answering it with what we have. So
Yeah, there's a lot of words she discusses, not necessarily in this text, words that we should eliminate. Words that have been eliminated. Scientists, phlogiston, this came up in a different class. Phlogiston is an interesting word that refers to something that was presumed to be necessary for fire. So 100 years ago. Scientists don't invoke this term anymore because they don't think it refers to anything, so it's gone. It's out of the lexicon. Imagine keeping it. That's too confusing. We don't speak of elan vital. Scientists don't speak of spirit and mind, and perhaps even consciousness needs to be reduced to some other clearer scientific language. Eliminate the confusing language, because those concepts don't, in fact, move us forward in a discussion about what consciousness is, what mind is. She is a reductionist. She says that in the first page. But she's not a pure, as she puts it, bottom-up reductionist. And what she means by that is it's a straw man to assume neuroscientists, are only trying to explain consciousness just by looking at individual neurons firing. That's not what she's saying. A straw man, by the way, is what? Falsely misrepresenting somebody's argument and then attacking that misrepresentation. No, she's not that kind of reductionist. But she's also not somebody who's like Descartes and a priori metaphysician. Yeah.
During her career, or I mean at any time, because she attacks people who are dualists for just saying, oh, it's impossible, we'll never get there. But do dualists have any kind of like real argument, that's like, oh no, it couldn't be?
Yes. Next class.
Do people, okay, I was going to say, do people combat her with those?
Yeah.
And are they relevant?
We'll see. That's an open question until Wednesday. Let's end you with this. Last point. We have a minute almost. So she mentions this. What are examples of things that we've changed through scientific understanding? We can do so with consciousness. We used to think the sun was a God-driven chariot. Now we think it's a massive ball of nuclear fire. Or maybe it'll change again. We used to think that the earth was sort of a flat surface that had cherubs blowing in the four corners. Now we think it's a great ball hurtling around the sun. We used to think that the heart was a cauldron concocting animals' spirits. I don't know what that would be. But now we think it's a pump mechanism for the circulation of blood. If we have all these conceptions of these physical things in the world, including bodily organs like the heart, like the kidneys, maybe we can do the same with the brain. And that's part of what she's doing, and that's part of where you see developments, successes, we'll see in question marks, with respect to artificial intelligence. We'll see how that connects. So make sure you do the 2 readings for next time. Frank Jackson, which is 3 pages. Good luck on that. But it's complex. And then Chalmers' Puzzle of Conscious Experience. And then do your reflections. Clapping you. Yeah. And I got everyone who came in late. Anyone who came in late? I think I got everyone, yes. Did I get you? You were on time.
I was not on time.
Oh, but I didn't do roll. You signed the sheet. That's right. Never mind. Good.